Miracles. What are they? Do they happen? What are some of the philosophically interesting aspects of miracles? That's what I'm going to talk about today. Miracles. Lots of fertile aspects of miracles for a philosopher to think about. Well, let's start with the beginning. What is a miracle? What is a miracle? You know, so much of philosophy begins with just analyzing our ordinary language. Before we even get into any of the nitty-gritty debates about miracles, let's just see if we can come up with a definition, just so we're all on the same page. And here, most of the classic thinking about miracles goes back to our old friend David Hume. Hume, if you recall what we said about Hume in the past, remember, Hume was the guy who thought you can never prove such a thing as causation, causality, that the future will be like the past is just an assumption. Well, what did Hume say about miracles? Hume said miracles, the first thing he said is he offered a definition, and it's a definition many philosophers have gone back to. Miracles are a intervention in nature. That kind of language goes back to him. Hume will talk about miracles as a temporary violation of a law of nature here. These aren't exact quotes from Hume, by the way. These are, this is the gist of what he says. You'll find it, though, in people following Hume, people like J.L. Mackie. Remember him from the last lecture on the problem of evil? So these kinds of notions of a miracle. A miracle is when God interferes in the order of things, when God suspends temporarily some law of nature or violates some law of nature for some purpose. Well, okay. That's a standard way of thinking about miracles. For who? For Hume? For whom? For who else? Well, I hope you can see by now that that whole way of thinking about a miracle as a intervention, as a violation of a law of nature, that only makes sense on a certain view of God, namely the theistic personalist view, right? I've written about miracles in a journal article where I say that this is the God the outsider view, right? You've got creation, you've got the universe, and you've got a God who looks at it like a machine from the outside, periodically gets involved in the machine, moves things around on the inside. Okay, let's think about that way of thinking about miracle for a moment. We'll come to another way of thinking about miracles at the end. But what are some philosophical issues for us to think about if we think about miracles that way? 1. Is it ever reasonable to believe in a miracle? Is it ever reasonable to believe in a miracle? Now, Hume famously said this: evidence has to be proportioned to the claim being made. What does that mean? It means something very similar to what the American scientist Carl Sagan said some years ago. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Suppose I told you that I raised a man from the dead. Yeah, I did. The man had died, I put my hands on him, and I brought him back to life. You would, I hope, be a little skeptical. Even though it is your beloved philosophy professor making this claim, I hope that you would be a little skeptical of my claim. You would say, perhaps he's joking. Perhaps it's the setup of a joke. No, I say, it's no joke. There is no punchline to be delivered here. Well, then you're going to think, oh, maybe something's gone wrong in his brain. Maybe we have to write to his boss and say, look, Kovac, he seems like a good guy, but he's developing some symptoms of mental illness. Maybe you should have him go talk to a doctor. That would be a perfectly reasonable thing for you to do. Perfectly on all fours. Okay. I go to the doctor, my tests come back normal, I'm not psychotic. I'm not showing any symptoms of schizophrenia or delusion or anything like that, except for this one odd claim I keep making. This one odd claim. Well, Hume says, even then, you would have good reason to think I'd gone wrong. Perhaps my perception of events was inaccurate. My perception of events, perhaps the person wasn't dead. They were just sleeping. For some reason they appeared dead to me. Maybe I was so pumped up on adrenaline when this was happening that, if you ask me, did you check his pulse? Well, in my memory, yeah, I checked his pulse. But, I was so adrenaline fueled at that moment that, in fact, I didn't check his pulse. I just immediately put my hands on him and raised him from the dead. You see, Hume says that when there's these extraordinary claims of laws of nature being violated, you can always find a more plausible explanation. Hume will even make claims like this. When religious people claim to have witnessed miracles, they're having a kind of confirmation bias. What do I mean by that? It means, well, being a person who believes in a God who intervenes, I'm more likely to have my perception of reality colored through that religious filter. So that, had I not been a religious believer, I would have seen plain as day that a miracle didn't occur. But having my vision of reality colored, filtered through this religious perception, I see things that aren't there. Think of it this way. Have you ever had a crush on someone and you were so hopeful that they liked you back that the most mundane things they would do you could interpret as gestures of flirtation, right? So much as a hello, you thought, oh, good, they must like me the same way I like them. You ever have that experience? Right? Your perception of reality gets filtered through your hopes, through the adrenaline and the emotional going-ons in your mind, right? It starts to change how you see everything. Well, Hume thinks that religious people are kind of like that. They're so hopeful that there's a God who intervenes in reality that they're not lying when they say they saw a miracle. It's just that their ability to tell reality from non-reality has been tampered with. Of course, I don't know why one would say that the same thing can't be said for the non-religious person. The non-religious person is so committed to a secular, reductivist understanding of reality that a miracle could happen in front of him or her, and the non-believer will conjure up, the same way Hume thinks the religious person conjures up, the non-believer will conjure up a naturalist's explanation for what happened. That seems just as reasonable to me. What about you? Well, let's think about that. Is it ever reasonable to believe in miracles on testimony? Well, maybe if there's corroboration of the miracle, that sounds like a good place to start. Look for corroboration of the miracle. Are there multiple witnesses? Some miracles have had multiple witnesses. So that's one big question with miracles. When is it reasonable to believe in them? Here's another interesting question. What would miracles tell us, if true? If they occurred, what would they tell us? Some people have thought that a miracle would be proof for the truth of one religion over another. Now, Hume makes an interesting point here, that given that all of the world's religions claim instances of miracles, I can think of claims of miracles in the history of Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism. I'm pretty sure I've seen Hindu claims for miracles. So the big five, at least. Well, if a Hindu or a group of Hindus claim to be witnesses to a miracle, and a group of Christians claim to be witness to a miracle, can both religions be true? Hume says, isn't this itself evidence against miracles, and certainly against their ability to be cited as evidence for a religion's belief? Well, here it seems to me there's a little bit of a problem in Hume's argument, and I think Richard Swinburne has written about this. There would only really be a problem here if the miracle in question was such that, if true, it contradicts some central claim of another religion. In other words, there have been claims of the Eucharistic host at Catholic Mass suddenly bleeding blood. That's a claim that's been made by people who claim they've seen that happen. Such a miracle would be evidence for the truth of the Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation, the Catholic belief that at Mass, the host and the wine cease to be bread and wine and become the body and blood of Christ. And that would seem to indicate that any religion that denied transubstantiation is false. But of course, not all miracles are of such a nature, right? Not all miracles are of such a nature. There could be other kind. There could be a miracle. It could be a miracle where I turned some piece of rock into a piece of gold. Suppose I'm a very poor person. I need money, so I pray to God to turn some rock into a gold so I can take it down to the market and sell it. That wouldn't prove anything about any religion. Here's a really interesting argument about miracles, and this is from a woman named Christine Overall. She wrote this argument. And she means to prove that miracles, if they occur, would disprove the existence of God. There would be evidence against the existence of God. Her argument goes like this. It's a kind of version of the problem of evil, by the way. God, being all-powerful and all-good, should have and could have set up the universe at the moment of the Big Bang in such a way that God wouldn't have to step in and intervene from time to time. Why didn't that damn incompetent fool God set up the universe at the first moment of its existence in such a way that the machine would always work perfectly, and God wouldn't have to come in and fix messes from time to time? And it seems like a character flaw for God to have not done so. I mean, if God's going to suspend laws of nature from time to time to get things back on track to how God wants them to be, well, that suspension of a law of nature, that's going to jeopardize our ability to scientifically understand the universe. Naughty, naughty God. Naughty God. Shouldn't have done it. Should have gotten it right the first time. didn't, therefore does not exist. No all-good, all-knowing God would have set up a universe so fundamentally flawed that God had to periodically fix it by way of a miracle. Now, I've written about Overall's argument, and here's what I noted. This is why I'm talking about the God, the outsider view of things. It's theistic personalism through and through, and need not be. What if there's another way of thinking about God and miracles, such that God doesn't come out as an incompetent fool? Is there such a way? I think there is. I know! Let's see what classical theism can tell us about miracles. See, remember on a classical theist account, one of the things we read, for example, in the Herbert McCabe article, is that God can't intervene. Why? Because God lacks the power? No. Because God has too much power. God is already involved in every single thing that happens. To intervene, you have to be an outsider. If I see you getting mugged on Lincoln Boulevard, I can intervene. I can jump in and get your assailant away from you. But I can only intervene from outside the mugging. I cannot intervene in this lecture. I'm giving the lecture. How can I intervene in the lecture? Now, I'm here in Florida. You might be able to, with my mother, you might be able to tell from the rather weird way the room is set up. Not the way I would set up a room. She can intervene in this lecture. She could come running in and start screaming something and turn off my computer, and then she's intervened in the lecture. But I can't intervene in my own lecture. You can only intervene in something you're outside of. Now remember, for the classical theist, God makes everything to be just as it is at any given moment. God is responsible for the rain, not directly, for the existence of the rain, for the sheer existence of whatever is. For the sheer existence of things, how they are, God is responsible. So if it's raining, there's a real sense in which God is responsible for it being raining. Now, ordinarily, God causes things to come about by causing things to act according to their nature. For example, God makes rain clouds. Let's simplify our understanding of the weather for a moment. God makes rain clouds, the sort of thing that produce rain. So if it's raining, is God responsible? Yes, but he's responsible by means of rain clouds. Right? Because God makes rain clouds to exist. God makes rain clouds to be the kind of thing they are, the kind of thing able to produce rain. However, being omnipotent, all-powerful, God can make it rain without rain clouds. If God wants it to rain, God could just make it to rain outside. No problem. And this isn't an intervention at all. This isn't a violation of the law of nature. Because whether it's raining with or without a rain cloud, it's the will and doing of God. So, for the classical theist, a miracle is nothing more than God bringing something about without, as God normally does, doing so by means of a secondary cause, right? God is the ultimate first cause of rain, but normally does it through a secondary cause, a cloud. Okay. It seems to me if you're a classical theist, then Christine Overall's argument doesn't work, right? God doesn't, on the classical theist account, God doesn't set up a universe at the beginning of time and then let it run like a machine, periodically making sure the machine's doing what God wants, right? No. God is intrinsically bound up with everything that is and makes everything to be at all, anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever. Whether God decides to do something by means of a secondary cause, or just to do it directly, well, who knows why God decides to make those decisions. But it doesn't look like a character flaw on the part of God, especially since for the classical theist, a God doesn't have a moral character to begin with. So, these are some of the interesting questions, I think, surrounding miracles. I think the classical theist has an advantage when considering them. The classical theist can also, given his or her conception of theism, his or her way of approaching God, and the concept of miracles, can make more sense of the idea of prayer. For the classical theist, prayer is just a matter of asking God for things that you want because you know that God can bring them about. That's all prayer is. Asking God for things you want because you know God can bring them about. What's the theistic personalist think about prayer? Harder to say. It seems to be more of a request for interventions. But remember, for the classical theist, whatever happens is God's bringing it about. So for the classical theist, it makes perfect sense, if you're on a sports team, to pray to win. After all, whoever wins, it'll be God's doing. No matter what, it's God's doing that one team win. And whatever team does, it's God bringing it about, because there would be no teams if it weren't for God. There would be nothing. So, if you want to win, it makes perfect sense to ask God to make you the winner. Of course, God might not. God has no obligation to you to do what you want, but it makes perfect sense to ask for it. After all, since everything that comes about is the result of the will of God, God can also will conditionals. What's a conditional? It's an if-then. God wills that if a rain cloud get into certain barometric conditions, it rains. That's the will of God. It's been happening since the dawn of time. God wills that if I let go of this ring, it will fall to the earth. It's the will. Watch, it's going to happen now. There, it happened. God wills that matter, that material things with mass, become attracted to other objects with mass at a certain rate, such that if I drop it, it falls. Well, God can also will conditionals with regard to prayer. Whether God does so in any particular case, God only knows, but it's certainly possible. So prayer is, on the classical theist's way of looking at things, completely reasonable. Completely reasonable for that very reason. Okay, so, as you're going into your final paper, I think miracles, a lot of good stuff to think about with miracles. You could write a paper about whether it's ever reasonable to believe in testimony regarding miracles. You could write about whether or not miracles would ever serve as evidence for religious belief. You could even write about whether or not miracles are possible. These are all interesting questions. Hope you're all well. I think I have one more topic for you this semester. I want to talk about life after death. It'll be a short lecture. I'll do a short lecture about the question of life after death. That should be up hopefully early next week. Then you'll have plenty of time to write your papers by Monday, May 4th. Email me if you have any questions. I'll be in office hours. Tomorrow's Friday, and again next week, and you can always request a meeting with me. Take it easy.